This program is brought to you by PLI, the Practicing Law Institute. To learn more about this podcast, visit pli.edu/pro bono podcast.
Pursuing Justice just can't stay away from the movies. Now, another Oscar season is upon us, and our in-house movie expert, Chicago attorney John Whitcomb, has curated another 5 Oscar-nominated movies that show pro bono lawyers at work. This year, 4 of the movies are retellings of real pro bono cases in history, and one is just so unmoored from the reality of trial lawyering that it almost messed up an otherwise very fun film. As always, we had a great time making it, and we hope you enjoy our movies deep dive in the 3rd annual Pursuing Justice Goes to the Movies. Welcome to Pursuing Justice, the Pro Bono Files, a podcast from PLI, the Practicing Law Institute. We are here to tell pro bono stories that we hope inspire you to take your own pro bono legal work to the next level. I'm your host, Alicia Aiken. I've worked in civil rights, criminal defense, and civil legal aid, but now I'm a principal at the Danu Center for Strategic Advocacy and a faculty fellow at PLI. And I love getting to talk with volunteer lawyers and nonprofit legal projects around the country about the pro bono work that matters to them. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I do. Welcome, John, back to Pursuing Justice for what is now our 3rd annual Pro Bono in the Movies podcast episode. For anyone who hasn't listened to year 1 and year 2, will you introduce yourself? Tell folks who you are.
My name is John Whitcomb. I'm Alicia's husband. I'm also a partner at Monahan Law Group, where we do mental health law and represent hospitals, and I teach at Loyola University mental health law for children.
And also a movie fanatic. I thought I liked movies, and then I met you, and I discovered what liking movies means. And you have, for the 3rd year in a row, curated a list of pro bono movies for us to watch. And if I'm right, they're all Oscar nominated?
They are all Oscar nominated.
All right. So tell us what the 5 movies are, and tell us in the order that we're going to talk about them.
We first do Adam's Rib. We're returning to Spencer Tracy, who we did last year in Inherit the Wind. Adam's Rib is with Katharine Hepburn and is from 1949. We're then going to go on to a 2016 film, Loving, which is about the Loving versus Virginia case. And then our 3rd movie is going to be, we're going to go into British law, which is In the Name of the Father, which is a 1993 biographical film regarding the Troubles in Ireland. We are then going to do a 1997 movie, Amistad, which is a Steven Spielberg movie about the Amistad ship and the Supreme Court case that eventually occurred. And then we're going to conclude with Marshall, which is a 2017 American biographical movie about Thurgood Marshall as an attorney rather than as a Supreme Court justice.
Awesome.
We have seen all these movies again, or for the first time.
Yeah, I think Adam's Rib is the only one that was new for me. I am now thinking that rewatching movies, even if it's not necessarily your favorite, rewatching movies is valuable because I'm getting different things out of them, seeing them again. Talk Adam's Rib, which is a bananas romantic comedy.
So it was nominated for Best Screenplay in 1949. That was the only Oscar nomination. It did not win. It is an interesting movie. So it's about a attorney couple. They are married and live together, and he eventually ends up as a prosecutor because he works in the DA's office, and he prosecutes a woman for shooting at her philandering, abusive husband. He does not die, and Katharine Hepburn, who has her own practice, decides that after hearing about the case that she is going to go and represent the shooter in the case against her husband in court. And hilarity ensues.
If you know anything about trial practice, it is hilarity ensuing. First of all, it was mildly weird watching this film, only because it is like this attorney couple that likes each other very much, gets along very well, but then is sparring about this case. Because let's be clear, Katharine Hepburn's character made an intentional decision to volunteer herself to represent the criminal defendant, knowing that her husband was prosecuting the case.
Yeah, so the way the movie sets up is they actually show you the attempted murder, and it is done in a sort of like comedic way with her eyes closed. So they started off, and then our very competitive, very intelligent couple start talking about whether men and women are treated differently when dealing with adultery, that a man shooting his wife for sleeping with another man would be treated differently than, of course, a woman trying to attempt to kill a man. And so that's the premise.
Let's talk about the headline in the newspaper in the movie. Wife, oh no, I wrote it down. Wife shoots fickle mate in front of love rival. Like, it's all this kind of ridiculous joke. And the whole issue that he is abusive, but not part of the trial. I mean, I know it's 1949.
If we're looking at trial work, this is not the movie that you go to.
Right, no.
No, she does not have a defense to the actual facts, which is sort of what Spencer Tracy's whole argument is, that we both believe what she did is incorrect under the law, and then she does that women should be treated the same as men argument, and that's the whole premise. So they don't actually show her doing a defense to the actual shooting at trial.
She puts a whole bunch of women who have like traditionally male jobs on the stand. I didn't understand the relevance of that in the question of whether or not this woman unlawfully shot and tried to kill her husband.
Right. So that's the weird part about this movie, is that to have a trial about whether women and men in the same crime would be convicted in different ways is not really proved by showing that a woman can be a scientist or a woman can be a weightlifter. She's really looking at jury nullification. Don't look at what the crime is. Look at like how society views women right now. And so I think a lot of this is a product of its time. It's women are actually coming from the workforce for the first time because of World War II. It's 1949, men are coming back, and we're getting back into the traditional values. And we have two very capable attorneys here, but we don't see them being capable. We see them being smart. We see them having discussions at home about what happened in court. And I mean, we had a little bit of discussion about it, how much of a conflict this was. But, you know, it's in terms of a romantic comedy in 2025, it's a little hard to take. I'm not giving anything away.
Go ahead and spoil the 1949 film.
Yes.
It's fine.
Katharine Hepburn actually wins, and then because she more or less made a mockery of him in the court as well as what he believed and she believed, he ends up walking out of their apartment with them, and then they meet again at the tax attorney to reestablish how much they actually care for each other.
I mean, if I can put aside how terrible the procedure is and the law parts, I really enjoyed this film. Like, it's a lot of fun. Like, Hepburn and Tracy are funny, and it's very quippy. There's some great lines. Lawyers should never marry lawyers. It's inbreeding. It results in idiots and more lawyers.
Right.
Particularly relevant in our house because we produced one more lawyer. You know, Spencer Tracy says, you sound cute when you get Causey, which I do think is part of the reason she gets so mad that she says, I'll show you Causey.
Right.
It's a lot of fun. It's like a wild time capsule of trying to make sense of what do we think about marriage and professional women. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
So I like the scenes with them talking and clearly showing affection for each other and arguing over ideas over the court scenes. The court scenes were bananas, and I was like, you've lost me here. But them arguing about issues, they clearly care for each other. He clearly respects her, but he wants her to agree with them. They're competitive.
Right. Oh, yeah. Are they ever? Yeah. Maybe we won't spoil the final twist, the final scene in the movie, which has a little like, I can't stop competing with you twist.
We won't? Why won't we do that?
Because we want people to go watch the movie. You got to leave them something to find.
My feeling about this movie is that once they got out of the apartment, I did not like the movie.
My final thing on this movie is it does pop up on a lot of official lists of one of the best romantic comedies of all time. So for sure, go see it. But if you are a lawyer, just put your feelings about procedure and evidence to bed and enjoy Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn doing their bit, because it is fun. And that's our last fun movie. The rest of them are pretty serious.
I just want to talk a little about the pro bono in this.
The pro bono part.
So this is an interesting, that is going to be the theme throughout these 5 movies, is that she has a cause. So she goes out and seeks out the criminal defendant in this, the wife who did the shooting, and tells her that she will represent her, that she will do it for free. And they have a discussion about what that will mean in the beginning, which is very short, but she doesn't tell her that she's doing it to sort of stick her finger in the eye of her husband. But
Right. That would be important information to know. Yeah.
She gives a speech that women should be treated the same as men in court. And so that's why she was doing this. And this is just another one of those examples of people with a cause coming in and saying, hey, I'll represent you for free in order to facilitate my objectives.
Right. Yes. That is a theme for pretty much all of these. That's true. All right. Remind us what's next.
So the next movie is my favorite movie of the 5 that we saw, which is the 2016 movie about Loving versus Virginia. So Loving versus Virginia, it's about Richard Loving, who was a white construction worker who fell in love with somebody he grew up with, Mildred Jeter, and he decided to ask her to marry. She agreed. They went to Washington, D.C. from Virginia. They got married and came back and cohabitated in basically their community in Virginia. And they were arrested because of the miscegenation that said that a white man could not marry. She was mixed race, but
she was considered a black woman under the law.
Yeah. Right. There's language in the actual movie. You don't know what's right and what's wrong, is what the arresting sheriff said to Richard Loving.
I actually wrote that down because he refers to like the way his dad raised him and the town that he lives in. And I got very curious. I think there was this community in Virginia that was fairly comfortably integrated. That's how the film makes it seem.
Yes.
And it does explain a lot about how this relationship came to be, but also places like that as they existed often get erased from history, right? There's this notion that like, there wasn't anywhere that people were like crossing racialized boundaries. Like, no, there were people and communities that did it, but other systems punished them for it. Like these folks got punished for being married.
So I loved this movie because of the acting. The lead, Ruth Negga, who plays Mildred, it's not chewing the scenery acting. It is very low key. And I thought Joel Edgerton as Richard Loving was fantastic because he's not the motivator. His role in here, and I think it's corroborated by history, is that he simply wanted to protect his family, including the woman he loved. He didn't want to cause any problems, but he is not an articulate person, but his humanity is shown through his actions in this movie more than any acting I can remember. He has fewer lines. His lines are more important because of that, I think. But he is not the activist. He was along because he loved his wife and he wanted her to be able to go back to her family in Virginia.
Right. And we should talk about that because these are facts. Even though I've always been familiar with Loving versus Virginia, the Supreme Court case, I've not been familiar with kind of the underlying facts, right? So they live in Virginia. They go to DC. They get married. It's legal in DC. They come home to Virginia. Somehow the authorities find out and then arrest both of them for violating the law. And they release him, but they will not let her get bailed out, right?
And I think that's a huge issue for him. In the movie, it was a huge issue for him that he was not allowed to protect his wife, that she was going through something that he couldn't stop for something that arguably they did together. And it is the scenes in which he's trying to figure out how to get his wife out.
Oh, heartbreaking.
They're heartbreaking, and they're played with quiet dignity by Joel Edgerton in this. It is a hard movie to watch because their relationship is so clearly established in this movie that you're feeling his pain.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the lawyering, because there's actually several different lawyers that they interact with, right? So that first arrest in Virginia, they hire a lawyer, make money they really don't have. They hire a lawyer, and that lawyer is like a local deal maker. He is trying very much to protect them. But it's often this thing I talk about when I'm training lawyers, like you might have a solution for this case, but your solution is going to have an impact on people's lives. And that's an unbelievably hard judgment call for people, but you have to be aware that your solution might actually be bad, right? So his solution is plead guilty and to avoid going to prison for anywhere from 1 to 5 years. And part of your guilty plea is that the two of you have to leave the state where all of their family and community is for 25 years. Like the fact that some court in the United States in the 20th century ordered a family to leave the state for 25 years, we cannot forget that our country does these things, has done these things, did them recently, Washington, D.C., which she hates.
Well, no, they come back. And they get caught again, and they get arrested again. And then that attorney comes in and said, Judge, they misunderstood what I said because they thought they could give birth here. The truth, which I'm not sure why they didn't do the truth, is that he actually advised them that they could come back as long as they didn't stay in the same house and co.
Oh, you looked it up.
I did, because I was curious about how this case got back in. And I was curious about, again, whether this attorney did what he did in the movie, which he did, which is he said, Judge, this was my fault. I told them that they can do this. They won't do it again. And then he tells them when they're leaving that time, you can't come back.
Then there's a fact which starts to get us to the pro bono lawyering part of what Mildred really did when they were living in DC. Now they have 3 kids. She doesn't like raising her kids in the city. She doesn't like living there. And you told me this part's true. She wrote a letter to the Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy, asking for help. Right?
She did. And she also wrote to the ACLU, and they imply that's the same letter, but it's not.
And then what does the ACLU do?
So they're trying to establish an office in Virginia. So Bernie Cohen is an attorney who is just out of law school, and he has been appointed to start the ACLU office in Virginia. According to the movie, Bernie Cohen very much wants this case because they want to go after the miscegenation laws. He gets them to agree for him to do the case. There is some very interesting issues about listening to the client regarding with him. He then has a case that he has to figure out how to do, and he goes back to his law professor. And Phil Hirschkoff, who is a civil rights attorney, was there, And I believe he did this pro bono. At least the movie implies that he is the pro bono attorney who volunteered to work with Cohen in order to have this case go to get it up to the Supreme Court, which they knew that it would.
Yeah. So let's talk for a minute about that listening to your client part, because what Bernie Cohen does, he's very excited, right? He's very eager, and he's got a plan. And he says to these two folks who now have 3 children who have been arrested twice, merely for their relationship. He says, here's what I want you to do. Go back to Virginia, get yourself rearrested, and I'll be there to bail you out. Richard Loving just looks at him and goes, we're not going to do that.
And then Cohen changes and says, yeah, I can see how that would be a problem.
And Cohen's played by Nick Kroll, which I think is important because he's got that Nick Kroll kind of like a big eye, like look about him. He's like, oh, yeah, I can see. Yeah. Oh, yeah, maybe you're right. And then they get in the car, and Mildred and Richard are talking about the meeting they've just had with the lawyer. And Richard says, well, you get what you pay for. And I thought it is a potentially instructive moment for 2 things, right? One is how do you talk to your clients about strategy, about the hard things that they might have to do? You and I have both had to talk to clients about, hey, you're going to need to get held in contempt of court so that you can fight it. That's a hard conversation to have. So it's this instruction about how do you handle those conversations well, but it's also this issue, which, as you already identified in the Adams rib, where she took the case for her cause, the ACLU is taking this case for their cause. They're not taking the case because they really want to help Richard and Mildred Loving. They're taking the case because they want to strike down the anti-miscegenation laws nationwide. We always say the ACLU's client is the Bill of Rights, not the people whose names are attached to the cases.
I thought that scene was done very well. And, it shoots at anybody who comes in with an idea of what the client should do, and without listening to the client and finding out what the client is willing to do, what they're capable of doing, and what the implications were. The end of the movie, obviously they win because Loving versus Virginia, but they've lost every step of the way. Mildred is clearly running the litigation.
Yes.
And finally, Bernie Cohen asks him, what do you want me to tell the court to Richard Loving? And he says, just tell them that I love my wife. They didn't go to the court. They didn't.
To the Supreme Court. Oh, yeah. He was like, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
Like, these people have treated us horribly. All the judges, I'm not going. And they did an article for Life magazine. A photographer comes to the house, played by Michael Shannon. And this really happened. And in the movie, they reproduced the photos that were really taken. But that's might be good for the case to have the notoriety, but it's not good for them locally.
Yeah.
Right? It really takes his anxiety up that he thinks that his house is going to be raided and they're going to be harmed.
This movie is beautifully photographed. Beautifully
Yes.
photographed. The cinematography is unbelievable. But there's a palpable tension throughout this movie in all the scenes after they get arrested until the final decision. So I loved this movie.
I didn't love it the first time, and I think it's because it was quiet, and I was expecting a rights. And this time I loved it. This time I was ready for the humanity of it.
Yeah. The acting made this a very real relationship for me. It gave faces and emotions and everything in very low key level to this case. So
what did it get nominated for?
So just Ruth Negga for Best Actress.
And she did not win, right?
She did not win. So the next movie is In the Name of the Father. It has an all-star cast. So this is Gary Conlon. It is a young man in Belfast. There's bombings in London, and he is eventually accused, along with his father, of being the organizer of a bombing ring in London that was blowing up pubs for the IRA as part of the Troubles, as I said earlier. And this is his fight to be exonerated. This, In the Name of the Father, is based on that his father, who came to collect him, eventually gets arrested as well. And in this movie, actually serves time in prison with him until he dies. The pro bono aspect is that Emma Thompson plays Gareth Pierce, and Gareth Pierce is an attorney who represents both the father until he dies and eventually represent Daniel Day-Lewis, who plays Jerry Conlon. This movie got nominated for a ton of Academy Awards and won none. It got nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Actor for Daniel Day-Lewis, Best Supporting Actor for Pete Postlewaite, Best Supporting Actress for Emma Thompson, Best Film Editing, and won none.
That's wild. I remember when this film came out, this is the first Daniel Day-Lewis film maybe that I saw, and it totally blew me away. I was like, that guy can act.
Good.
It's funny now seeing it this time. I still think the acting's amazing, but I think the arc of the main character was less big than I think I thought it was when I was younger and I saw it.
Jerry in the movie is portrayed as sort of a ne'er-do-well who you see him initially stealing copper in Belfast and getting chased by the British Army because they think that he might be a sniper, and the IRA is getting pissed off because the fact that they thought he was a sniper brought in more troops into that area, and they actually have some operations going on in there.
Right.
And they send him off to London, and then he gets accused in London of the bombing in Guildford. The father then comes to sort of say, my son would never do anything like this, and then he gets arrested, and they all get convicted. There's a
aunt, uncle, niece, nephew, friends. Like, this is such a stain on the British justice system, because in the time since these convictions, which happened it actually happens in the 70s, late 70s, late 70s.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Is when it takes place. Like, the number of people who are convicted on just the thinnest non-evidence after abusive interrogation techniques and serve long periods of time in prison and eventually are utterly exonerated. It is this real story and a material lesson about how societies, when they're afraid, because the IRA was bombing London, when societies become afraid, the whole system can lose its ever-loving mind, and really terrible things can happen through the justice system, right? I mean, that is what kind of was hitting for me in this film, both the first time I saw it and this time.
As a legal thriller, it's not great. As a personality sort of emotional movie, the three leads are superb. I think Daniel Day-Lewis and Pete Postlewaite as father and son do very well in their prison scenes together. I think Emma Thompson comes in and sort of articulates her ability to care for people, even though they want nothing to do with her initially.
Jerry Conlon's character says, to me, you were just a lawyer first, and I hated lawyers.
Right, because he had been convicted by lawyers, and he was defended by lawyers who couldn't actually protect him.
Right.
So she initially meets the people because she's going into the prisons to check conditions, especially health conditions, which his father has. He has pretty bad lung issues, eventually dies of that in prison. And then she's allowed to, with supervision, look at the father's records. And she actually looks at Jerry's and finds that there was material evidence that was excluded by the police and the prosecutors at the trial, which would have at least arguably given him an alibi and exonerated him. So Emma Thompson goes back into court, and then in probably one of the worst cross-examinations in history. I think I've actually said that about Abe Lincoln in our Young Mr. Lincoln podcast, but it was a similar thing where instead of asking questions, she was just yelling at him. And he eventually broke down and said either nothing, and the judge agreed with her questions, not any of the answers, and threw the case out. And then with rising music, they walked out the front door of the courtroom. So again, this is, as a legal thriller, this is not a great movie. As a sort of character study of like the Brits actually did this to these people, this clearly identifies their culpability and what its effect was on these people. I think it's an emotional movie to watch, as long as you're like, it's a little not quite based on real events.
Right. Like during the movie, I was like, I can't believe the prison system would put a father and son who they think are joint terrorists together in a cell, which of course never happened in real life.
Right.
So yeah, things like that. But it is a great film, but I agree with you. Like it's not, the legal issue isn't necessarily the center of it, but certainly that message that the legal system is utterly capable of doing injustice, but it doesn't have to be over, that lawyers can come back and force a relook. And that often those are pro bono lawyers, because there's no money in forcing the system to take responsibility for something it did wrong in the past. We don't really get much about what Emma Thompson's motivations are or why she takes it on, except that she believes deeply that this is wrong and that these people should be freed. Maybe, I don't know, that's a bit of hope, right? It never has to be over. That there's always an opportunity to keep demanding that the system reconsider its past acts.
Pete Postlewaite is in our next movie as well, who played the father in this and plays the prosecutor in Amistad, which is the 1997 Steven Spielberg movie. It is everything that you would think of a Oscar bait movie to be.
Right.
It got nominations for that, for Anthony Hopkins for Best Supporting Actor, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, Best Original Dramatic Score, all of those nominations, and it didn't win any of them.
Interesting. This movie gives me a lot of feelings.
So when I first saw this movie, I thought it was Oscar bait. I didn't think it was as good as I did seeing it again. There's things that strike you untrue about the movie when you see it. Jaimin Hansu, he was amazing as Sinke in the movie. I thought that character does an incredibly good job of articulating in his acting this fish out of water, not being able to tell what you're going to do, but having a sense, being able to understand what's going on around you and trying to make sense of your world. That part I thought was handled very well.
We should give a little grounding on what it is, because this is a 30-year-old movie, and it is also a historical event that, again, we're real good at not remembering historical events in the U.S. Yeah. So the Amistad is the name of a ship, right?
Right.
That was carrying people from West Africa who had been kidnapped into slavery in the 1830s. After the transatlantic slave trade is illegal in the United States, the domestic slave trade is thriving. So this boat, if I understand correctly, this boat has been to Cuba or headed to Cuba. I was a little confused about that.
It goes to Cuba. They changed the manifest there to have all the people's names changed to something else. So it looks like a domestic. They were born in Cuba, so it's a domestic slave trade. That fact may seem silly, but it actually, because of the treaty that is the whole case, this is actually an admiralty case about who owns goods, as is explained by Matthew McConaughey in the beginning of the movie, that this is not about slavery. This is about who owns the goods on the ship, which are people. Which is why, to me, trying to latch on to Jaimin Hansu's performance is the saving grace of this movie to me, because it actually gives some grounding of the humanity to it. And the movie wants grounding in humanity, because an argument over whether the international treaty applies to goods on a ship is not a humane argument. Anthony Hopkins, who plays John Quincy Adams' Supreme Court speech, they take out the speech that talks about slavery and ignores the other 4 hours and 48 minutes that he talks about the treaty and that we have to abide by the treaty, which is actually what the decision of the Supreme Court is. It is a weird decision, except for how it actually articulated that somehow there's something immoral about people from Africa.
Well, and again, for folks who don't know the event, right, essentially the kidnapped people revolted, took control of the ship, killed the captain. They ordered 2 navigators to take them back to Africa, all while not speaking the same language as the navigators on the ship. And then the navigators take the ship north, and they end up getting captured just off of the coast of Long Island, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, there's this wild scene in court where the ambassador of Spain is claiming that Spain owns the enslaved people on the ship. And then the navigators from the ship are claiming that they own them because they're the last people from the ship. And the U.S. military folks who captured the ship are claiming they own the goods. And then there is a, anti-slavery abolitionist newspaperman, Lewis Tappan, who is the one who hires, this isn't pro bono, hires Matthew McConaughey to be the lawyer to represent them. Matthew McConaughey is arguing that they were illegally kidnapped into slavery, so therefore they were free men fighting off their kidnappers.
Yes, which makes it legal for them
to have killed people and taken over the ship because they were kidnapped. It was self-defense.
So Tappan, who is an abolitionist, is not portrayed well because he doesn't care whether the kidnapped to-be slaves would win or not. If they get hung, they're martyrs for his cause. If they win, he wins.
I feel like I see what Spielberg wanted to do with this film. There is in this film an absolutely devastating section about the Middle Passage.
Yes.
Of people who were kidnapped in Africa and transported across the Atlantic and what they experienced and how they were treated. And I almost feel like that's an unbelievably brutal scene to watch, but a really important scene to watch. Yeah. And this film is in 1997. A year later, he does Saving Private Ryan, which has a similar kind of scene with this absolutely brutal scene reenacting what happened at D-Day and what people on the ground experienced in D-Day that people still talk about today, right? So it's just interesting to think about this film in the context of Spielberg's career and what he's trying to do with history and filmmaking and how people react to it. But there's just something very heavy-handed about Amistad. I found the score to be really heavy-handed. Yeah. And I found a film who I think the attitude of the film is to see the humanity of Cinque, who's Jaimin Hunsu's character, and the other people on the ship. But then it does a whole lot of things that dehumanize them. Like, I had huge issues around the language stuff. So on the ship, when the Africans are speaking their native language, it is not subtitled. But when the Spaniards are speaking to each other, it's subtitled. So you as a watcher can hear and understand what the Spaniards are saying to each other, even though my Spanish isn't good enough for that. But when the enslaved folks are talking to each other, you don't know what they're saying. It seems like such a small thing, but it struck me as a really weird choice that said, you don't understand these people, they're others. And I don't even think they did that on purpose. I think there was something going on that they wanted to emphasize what it felt like to not be understood, but it just ended up dehumanizing the captives on the ship who claimed their own freedom instead of letting them speak. Let them speak. They can speak in their own language and you can subtitle and I can read it. Because we just released this Working with Interpreters program, I'm very hopped up on how do we communicate across languages really well. And I don't know, this film is really weird about it. It's really weird about it.
Yeah, and the language thing comes up again in the movie. They bring in somebody who doesn't really understand the language, who is trying to work with them to communicate and trying to use French and a bunch of other stuff. And to your point, the movie says that Anthony Hopkins playing John Quincy Adams, says, "Do you know their story?" And
Yes.
so the idea that Roger Baldwin has to communicate with the Africans in order to be able to tell their story and what they went through. And it seems like John Quincy Adams' speech before the Supreme Court, which he spoke for 5 hours. They take a very small section of that out, and he seems to be telling their story in this about what man would do if they were illegally enslaved and do it. It's a powerful speech, and especially given by Hopkins and his character.
And it's real, right? That is really from the Supreme Court argument in 1839.
He is the pro bono attorney. Baldwin is not. John Quincy Adams came and spoke before the U.S. Supreme Court pro bono because he believed in abolition. Historically, he didn't always believe in, but at the end of his life, he did. I do think that if you look at Spielberg, The Color Purple, Schindler's List, Amistad, and then Saving Private Ryan in that order, this is sort of a miss in terms of like the power of those other movies. But there are sections of this. The middle passage scene is horrendous. I mean, we've seen a play about that. I found that horrendous. This gave me the same sort of pit of my stomach. I can't believe that what I'm watching type thing, because it seemed both real and unbelievably horrific. So when Morgan Freeman, as a fictional character who comes onto the boats later, who gets sick seeing what happened, you get that feeling watching that. So if that may be the power of this movie, Anthony Hopkins' speech is the power of this movie. There is Matthew McConaughey's sort of legal maneuvers in court. He doesn't have his tics and is actually pretty good in court on this. But there are some discordant elements of it, which makes you feel a little queasy about what's going on in front of you for sections of this movie that doesn't seem to have to be there. So I think I'd recommend it.
But I go back to your original point to kind of stick the landing here, which is that I do think in a film that I think unintentionally othered his character and didn't let him speak in a language that the audience could understand, even through subtitles for most of the film, Djimon Hounsou was amazing.
Yes.
Like he was just this from every time he was on screen, he really communicated and conveyed so much of a full person. And that was very enjoyable. But yeah, maybe the film needed another pass with a screenwriter. Maybe it needed John Sayles to take a crack at the script. Our favorite filmmaker / script doctor. Okay, so that leads us to our final film.
So it's Marshall. It's a 2017 American biographical legal drama about Thurgood Marshall. And again, Thurgood Marshall, the first African-American Supreme Court justice. This is not about those times. This is about him working for the NAACP prior to Brown versus Board of Education. And I would argue that although he's the hero and he's played by Chadwick Boseman in an unbelievably star turn on this, he is charismatic, he is great. This is not, again, as the pro bono attorney, it is not his movie. It is actually Josh Gad's movie.
Yeah.
And Josh Gad plays Sam Friedman, who ends up trying the case because in the movie, Thurgood Marshall is not allowed to actually say anything in court because he's not licensed in that state. He's allowed to appear in court. He's allowed to give advice to Mr. Friedman during the court case, but he is not actually allowed to speak as it is articulated in this movie.
By the judge, right? Which you and I both were like, can a judge do that? We had a whole spirited debate on the couch about administration of the courtroom and how much judges' power have and abuse of discretion on appeal and all of that. But at the end of the day, And I actually didn't look this up to find out if that really happened. Did you?
I couldn't find anything. I know that he was not allowed to, he did not speak in court, and that Friedman did it, and that he appeared in court.
Okay. Let's be very clear, though. The idea of a pro hoc vice, a lawyer who is not licensed in the state, coming in with a lawyer who is licensed and saying, Your Honor, could you please, I'm sponsoring this lawyer just for this case to participate. They're licensed in another state. That is an absolute, pro forma, happens every single day, no big deal. So for a judge in 1940 in Connecticut to say to an experienced lawyer who's licensed in Maryland, no, you can't, that is about race and trying to keep him out and not wanting NAACP troublemakers getting involved in the case. It's not normal to say no to a pro hoc vice like that.
It's not normal to say, yes, you can appear, but if I hear your voice, I'm going to hold you in contempt.
So let's give people a little bit of a setup, because it's not what Thurgood Marshall is for many people associated with, right? You think of him as Brown versus Board, desegregating education. You think of him as being on the Supreme Court. What most people don't realize is that he spent a large portion of his career going around the country, mostly the South, defending men and boys who were falsely accused of rape, because rape in the time of Jim Crow was used as a tool to control Black men and to say, you looked at a white woman the wrong way. That's what Emmett Till was lynched for. We're accusing you of rape. And most people didn't get a trial. But in cases where they did get a trial, Thurgood Marshall was going around the country defending them. And there's a fantastic book for anybody who wants to know more about it called Devil in the Grove, about a case that he did in Florida. And a really terrifying night when Thurgood Marshall was almost lynched, which when you think about what a presence he was on the Supreme Court, it's heartbreaking to think about how history could have gone. But anyways, this case is in Connecticut. Joseph Spell is arrested and accused of sexually assaulting his employer. He's a driver for a rich family in Greenwich, Connecticut, and he is accused of raping Mrs. Strubing. And the community goes absolutely nuts, right? The New York Times is running articles, making him out to be literally a rabid ape attacking people. Definitely how it's portrayed in the movie, but I think probably in real life too, that local people start firing anybody who works for them who is Black. The NAACP sends Thurgood Marshall, their only lawyer, not just their best lawyer, but their one lawyer, into Connecticut to handle the case. And then what happens, John?
And so Sam Friedman, who is sponsoring him, pro hoc vice, you see him, he's played by Josh Gad, as being a very, very good attorney. He gets a case dismissed on technicalities, an insurance defense case. He is not a criminal defense attorney. And so he views that he's simply going to get Mr. Marshall admitted, and then that's going to be it. And the judge tells him, you're trying this case. So he has to learn how to try the case. We had some issues. Marshall is viewed as an attorney walking around with law books instead of a criminal defense book. He's walking around with a tort book, and a random case book. So it was clear that they knew that he should be carrying law books, but they didn't know what law books he should be carrying. But Josh Gad, who I don't have a strong opinion either way from him, was great in this role.
I agree.
He has an arc for him where he sort of goes in it for, I'm just going to get you admitted, and then I'm not dealing with this. This is going to cost me business, to, Marshall telling him towards the end of the case, you're one of us now.
That's right.
And
although, yeah, that's true. Yeah. But the one of us conversation was it was very important in the movie that Sam Friedman, the character, is Jewish, and that it's 1940, and with the war in Europe and what Hitler is doing with the Holocaust is a very present issue. And frankly, a lot of people forget that anti-Semitism was rising quite a bit in 1940 in the United States, not rising already high and exacerbated. And then to step up and defend a Black man accused of raping a white woman, yes, Marshall's saying you're one of us, lawyers for fighting for good, but he's also saying you're one of us because, the world that hates us is going to hate you too.
Yeah, no, it's a universal, you're one of us now. I'm not disagreeing with that, but Friedman in the movie again gets attacked and gets in a couple shots and is very proud of himself for like fighting back, beaten, but for fighting back. And so
I think he says to his wife, I got in the first punch.
Yeah. So it is very much that he's now standing up for himself and for his people, and for justice is the arc. But because Gad has like some screen presence in this, I think it goes very well on that transition. And because of the charismatic performance, Marshall in this, of leading him along the way and saying, I mean, he literally gives him the entire closing. And Chadwick Boseman is just like, you can't look away from him when he's on screen. I don't care that he didn't look like Marshall at all. I believe that he was Marshall in this movie because of the charismatic nature.
Right. It's interesting. People say, I was reading up on it, and people say that like that is the part that even though they don't look alike at all, that Boseman portrayed this swagger that Marshall really did have. Like that is how Marshall behaved. So I just want to give two quotes from the movie that are like Marshall and Gad talking. Early in the movie, Friedman, the character, is getting forced into trying this case, and he's trying to find another lawyer. And Marshall says, no, I want you. And he says, why me? He says, I need someone who will do what I say. And Friedman says, why do you think I'll do that? And he says, because you don't know what you're doing. You need me. But then at the end, and spoiler alert, Spell is acquitted because the story that the woman has told is so full of holes and nonsensical that Joseph Spell is acquitted of rape and freed. Marshall and Friedman are having a conversation. And at the end of it, after the win, Marshall says, I've realized I need an army of lawyers like you, lawyers who don't even know they want to make a difference, but with a little training can be just as capable as me.
So the pro bono nature of this is a little interesting as well. So the pro bono again, where Marshall comes in and says, we're the NAACP, we don't represent guilty people. And so he clearly has an agenda, and initially Spell says, I didn't have sexual relations with that woman, the Clinton line. And then when they find out that he did, he comes back and says, again, we don't represent guilty people. You have to tell us what actually happened. And then he tells the story that it was consensual. Mm-hmm. His statement on the stand is your statement about the lynching, which is basically, why would I openly tell white policemen that I had sexual relations with a white woman? That's how you end up on a tree.
Right.
That part, even the judge lets in the movie again. He lets that statement stand when they objected to it and says, no, we're going to let that stand. And eventually Spell is acquitted. I like this movie significantly more. The courtroom scenes were good, except for the two things. We didn't know whether the judge could do this.
But I 100% believe a judge could get away with it.
Yeah.
Whether they're allowed to, I don't know. But in their fiefdom of their courtroom, 100% a judge would pull that. And
they got everything else right. So why not get the right props? It seems like a huge miss on a movie that got everything else right.
Okay, here's what I'm going to say is two things. One is the screenwriter was a trial lawyer. Yep. So I think that's why the trial practice is good. But the screenwriter isn't necessarily on set when they're putting together the props. And if you didn't have any lawyer on set, nobody's going to point it out.
There's some interesting casting in that the parents of Trayvon Martin are depicting the parents of the next case that Marshall goes down on with, and the person who greets him, Benjamin Crump, the attorney. So that's sort of a good throw in, just like in Amistad, one of the members of the court was actually Harry Blackman.
And that's why these movies are important, is because we're not done yet.
This got nominated for Best Song. That's it. And it didn't win.
That is a travesty. This was a great film, and I liked it much more the second time I saw it. Chadwick Boseman left us too soon. And Josh Gad has skills, is my summary.
And I would agree with both of those.
Excellent. Well, it's been another great year. Thank you, John. Thank you so much. Thank you for picking the movies. Thank you for having me watch them all again. And thank you for doing this with us. And I'm looking forward to doing it for the 4th annual one next year. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to Pursuing Justice, the Pro Bono Files, a podcast from PLI, the Practicing Law Institute. This production is dedicated to the pro bono and public interest lawyers working to improve access to justice. A special thanks goes to our producer, Daniel Peinitz, as well as our host, Alicia Aiken. Please note that the views and opinions expressed during this podcast represent those of the individuals being interviewed and not necessarily those of PLI. PLI is a nonprofit learning organization dedicated to keeping attorneys and other professionals at the forefront of knowledge and expertise. For more information about PLI's wide-ranging curriculum of pro bono programs, visit pli.edu/pro bono.